I just got out of watching Screamboat, a reimagining of the 1928 Steamboat Willie animated short. This movie was announced one day after the character entered the public domain. Now, Disney still owns the Mickey Mouse universe overall, but Steamboat Willie is different, and that's how Screamboat was born. I've been interested in this for a couple of reasons. We obviously have this new genre I like to call shitty, low-budget horror remakes of characters from our childhood that absolutely suck and have no soul. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 1 and 2, The Mousetrap, The Mean One, the list goes on and on. Now we have Screamboat. My expectations weren't super high genre-wise, but this Steamboat Willie is played by David Howard Thornton, who's Art the Clown, and the costume was made by Quantum Creations FX, who work on big studio projects like Marvel Films, Free Guy, Tron Legacy, the list goes on and on. And with the trailer at least giving us some interesting lore, I decided to at least give this film a shot. Screamboat follows ferry passengers on a late night boat ride in NYC as the ferry breaks down and they must fight for survival against a seemingly harmless mouse turned monster. Now right out of the gate, I will say, this movie isn't nearly as offensive as the other films I mentioned in this genre that I made up with way too long of a name, but it's also not good. So on a baseline story level, I found it interesting what they did with Steamboat Willie, kind of making it into Screamboat, and I'll get specifically into the character stuff later in this video because I do want to talk all things spoilers. I want to talk about all the kills. I want to talk about all of the details with Screamboat because it is interesting the idea that they went with, but the basic story is again just as basic as it gets. You can tell this one isn't as limited as the other films in this genre, but it's not much better. So this takes place like outside of the ferry and then on the ferry as well, and you do get a sense of overall environment. You do feel trapped on this ferry. It's built up stakes well, but it doesn't execute on those stakes just because of all of the characters. Specifically, this film follows one girl that was kind of tracked down onto the ferry by a group of other girls that are just super drunk party girls celebrating one of their friends' birthdays. And then there's like a bunch of other characters, like random civilians that are also on the ferry. And I think that's another solid thing about this film is that they do build out a good character environment. There are multiple characters. It's not just like one group of friends. It's multiple different ideas going on, and it actually builds out an interesting enough like storyline, and you're interested to see how everything intersects. But the thing is, none of the characters are actually interesting. So our main girl isn't interesting. The party storyline, they're kind of just annoying because they're just annoying drunk people. There's like a manager of the ferry, there's a paramedic, there's this old guy that drops a bunch of Steamboat lore on them in the final act. This group of characters and the way we get to the point where we're at, it doesn't necessarily feel cheap, but I think it's just the fact that the kills feel so shoehorned in my opinion. Like it's the same exact formula of one person is by themselves in a specific part of the ferry, and then everyone just keeps on dying, and then you kind of have your final 5-6 people left. Now, as for the execution of Steamboat Willie himself, I feel like this was the most interesting thing going in because obviously you have David Howard Thornton, the guy who plays Art the Clown, one of the most interesting and exciting, I guess now up-and-coming horror icons. And actually, this movie does make David Howard Thornton like a human being, a tall-ass dude the size of a mouse. Now, in a lot of the trailers, it looked like they were using forced perspective, but you can really only use that for so long, especially in such an enclosed environment. A lot of this movie, unfortunately, is just Steamboat Willie on a green screen plate, opposite of actual characters, and it kind of just feels very cheap. Now, there are certain things they do with this character, certain kills that they're able to execute, and I'll talk about those specific things in just a second here, but the visual way that they execute the kills is so lackluster and lacks any emphasis at all whatsoever. There is no tension between any of the action at all. The formula was so repetitive, and then it just got worse and worse over time. We got to get through this other stuff so I can talk more in detail about the kills, but I'll leave you with this. Honest to God, I think this cat could have killed Steamboat Willie quicker than anyone on that ferry. And I'll get into some of the stupidest decisions I've ever seen on a movie screen in a very long time in just a second when I talk about spoilers. Visually, I don't think it's bad. It doesn't look as shitty as the other low-budget IP stuff. I think the acting is horrible, though. Like, this is absolute trash acting from everyone. Oh, and this movie also drags a lot, and I think it's because of the pacing thing that I mentioned earlier about how they kind of section off every single one of the kills. Feels like the same thing over and over. But now getting into spoiler territory, I mainly just want to talk about the kills and certain things that happen with like our main character and just decisions that they make that absolutely baffled me. So if you don't want any spoilers, you can skip to the timestamp right here so you can see my final score. There's just a couple of insane story choices that just felt like very lazy writing to me, not even necessarily low budget. It just felt like a baffling story choice. So there's one moment where they try to just kill off a bunch of characters at once, and it's a mass electrocution. So Steamboat Willie basically like sprays water all over the floor of like the lower deck of this ferry and then breaks an electric box, and the entire thing shocks everyone except for like two people. Somehow our main characters are standing right outside of the area where they would be getting electrocuted, but obviously they don't. But the reason this all happens is because right when the like lower deck, like almost everyone on the boat is introduced to Steamboat Willie, they're like, oh my God, what is this mouse doing? Let's all go and kill the mouse. So they run to go and kill the mouse, and he sprays them with water. And it's like maybe 10 to 15 people. And they're all like slipping all over the place. They'll like fall backwards. The boat isn't moving, by the way. The boat is moving at normal speed. Like they're just cruising. And they're all like going all over the place. Somehow this mouse that is smaller than this cat right here. Somehow this mouse has taken down 15 whole human beings by spraying water on them. As for some of the other kills, I will say at least they're a little bit more inspired than this. One of them, the guy gets like coated in a bunch of oil and he goes up in flames. The CGI is absolutely terrible, so that one didn't really work. He's also a police officer that decides to shoot about 15 rounds into an oil tank and then misses a target, again, smaller than the size of this cat, so why would he even try shooting? And there's another kill where these two girls, like part of the party group, they're doing one of the like TikTok trend faces where their mouth is wide open, and then a construction thing that like lifts the pallets goes directly through their mouths. That one was also really cool. I will say I feel like a lot of the practical effects, as in like the arms, bones, heads, faces, blood, it's all really cool. Really, the CGI is not a problem other than the fact that it limits the interaction of Steamboat Willie to the actual people that he's killed. Oh, and I also did want to mention the pure origins of Steamboat Willie. Basically, in this movie, they're saying that Walt Disney, by the way, they name drop Walt Disney, Steamboat Willie. They remake that animation, the iconic animation from the original animated short, and they basically say that the boat crashed, Steamboat Willie was locked away, and then he somehow got released, and everyone thought that Walt Disney actually made him up. It was a figment of his imagination. Like, that's the modern tale that we all say, is because obviously he's not real. But yeah, Mickey was real. He was stuck in this like cellar, and then they let him out, and now he's on a rampage. I will say at least that part felt slightly inspired to me. You know, it felt like they were trying to tell an interesting story. Obviously, in the Winnie the Pooh movies, the only like real part of the Winnie the Pooh story we get is actually like the beginning animation opening credits-esque thing. And I called that lazy. I wouldn't call this lazy just because it actually involves the plot and lets us slightly understand Steamboat a little bit more. But the Winnie the Pooh thing was just a lazy slasher where Winnie the Pooh was killing 4 hot girls. Here, it feels like they're actually trying to set up a world. I'm not saying it works, but that's what they at least attempt in a good way. At the end of the day, Screamboat is not much different than the other childhood slasher remakes that we've been getting nowadays, but I will say this is slightly better than the very low bar that these films have set. Overall, I'm going to give Screamboat a 4 out of 10. If you see or want to check out Screamboat, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.